So today for the daily participation, we'll look at classical demand and supply side economics. And up here on the screen, you can see three different graphs. Classical economics is the belief started by Adam Smith that the government really didn't need to get involved in the economy, that the marketplace, even at a macro level, would always end up making the best decisions possible. So not through government control, just by everybody going to work, all the businesses opening up and supplying, people purchasing, all that activity would have the result of aggregate demand, which is the total amount of demand as demonstrated in this far left-hand chart by this line here. So that is consumption, what people are buying at all price levels. And then they also believe that aggregate supply is represented by this vertical line. And the reason why aggregate supply, the total amount of supply, is a vertical line is that society is just going to produce at any price level. It's going to produce the same amount over the long run. Now, over the short run, that's not always the case. But over the long run, society is going to produce this much. And that's also demonstrated by the production possibilities frontier. Remember that curve that demonstrates this is the output, no matter what the price level. That's true in aggregate supply over the long run. So no matter what the price is, somebody is going to end up supplying these products. No matter what the price is, people are going to work. And so that's one of the arguments in favor of a minimum wage, that even if people are only getting paid 25 cents an hour, people are still going to work. And so that's why you do need to have some type of price floor. But anyway, this is what it looks like. And most of the time throughout history, especially up to the Great Depression, classical economists, which was pretty much everybody, thought that the government didn't need to get involved because eventually, even if demand falls, it will eventually go back up to whatever levels it needs to. And so, for instance, this AD1 might be total demand in the economy when there is some kind of economic contraction, and then when the economy improves, it will go up to the second line, this AD2. And so therefore, we'll see a higher standard of living and prices will be higher and so on. Now, people called neoclassical economists today believe that you can do some of this through manipulation of the money supply in particular to try to increase aggregate demand. So they're called neoclassical economists or monetarists because they believe in focusing on the supply of money in particular. But we're going to talk more about the other two, those that believe in demand side policies and supply side policies. Now, we've already talked about this a little bit in the past, because demand side policies basically started by a man by the name of John Maynard Keynes, Keynes. He's the one about partway through the Great Depression who started to say, hey, maybe this isn't going away on its own. We should encourage government spending or lower interest rates. That way people take out more loans and buy things. And so that increases overall demand. Keynes was his name, Keynes. And so whenever we talk about these people, they're also called Keynesians, and it's called Keynesian economics. But they believe that demand is what should be influenced, and we should try to increase the demand curve. So the same thing here, they're looking at aggregate demand, maybe when it's contracted, when a recession is happening. And so it's less than, and to increase the quantity, it pushes it out to AD2. And that's through, once again, the government spending or perhaps lower interest rates and more people are taking out loans and buying cars and purchasing houses and expanding their businesses. And they believe eventually what will happen over time, and you can see the supply curve. This is the long-run aggregate supply curve. This first one is labeled as Y1 because that's maybe when the recession starts. And then Y2 is the next year. And so they're basically showing that supply, the long-run supply, will eventually push outward to catch up with demand in particular. And they believe, therefore, that would help the economy return back to normal. Then you have supply-side policy, which is in the far right-hand side here. These are people, and some of them might also consider themselves neoclassical economists, but they're like Art Laffer, and the monetarists might include someone like Milton Friedman, for instance, but they believe that supply should be influenced the most. And politically, we refer to all this as Reaganomics, because Ronald Reagan was a big believer in this. We need to help out the suppliers, the businesses, by lowering taxes, decreasing regulation, maybe even providing things like government subsidies, but sometimes they shy away from that because that's also known as corporate welfare, which sounds bad. And they want to basically influence the supply of it all. And so the long-run aggregate supply, they say, hey, yes, things will return back to normal. They don't believe the government should be involved in the long run because these are typically more conservative people. But they do believe that in the short run, the aggregate supply is sloped. So the recession, for instance, during a recession, the supply curve in the short run is going to be back here to the left. And they would like to increase supply by pushing it out to the right. And you can only do that by making business-friendly policies. And so they believe the supply curve should be shifted outward. And that will decrease prices and therefore encourage people to purchase more. And if more is being supplied, there'll also be more people working. And so the far right-hand side graph shows exactly how they intend to do that. Now, of course, there are also things that naturally increase aggregate supply over the long run. That includes technology and better methods of production and better use of resources and so on. But they think policy should be advocating those types of activities in particular. Can you have a mixture of both? Sure you can. You can attempt to, for instance, stimulate both parts of this, both the consumption of goods and services and the production of them. And that involves, of course, political compromise. So perhaps in Congress you have Republicans, which are more likely to favor supply-side policy. Democrats more likely to favor demand-side policy. And so you might see a type of model that favors both. During the Obama administration, for instance, when they had some of that economic stimulus that was going on, there were policies that did favor both parties in particular. And just because one party favors one and the other party favors the other doesn't mean that you can find people in both parties that might actually like a little bit of both too. But that is, of course, why economics is sometimes normative. We talked earlier in the year, it's positive when it states the facts. It's normative when it says how the world wants to be. And so economists, if they are particularly more political, they're going to favor one or two of these policies based on their political leanings. Art Laffer in particular is definitely a conservative. He's definitely a Republican, so he's going to favor the supply-side policy from a normative perspective. Does anybody have any questions about any of that? Anything at all? Okay.